Welcome to the official YouTube channel for me, the Colin Cowherd Podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button right there so you don't miss any of our football content this postseason. Going to have instant reactions after every big game. Thanks. College football reactions presented by JLab. JLab has the best audio products in the game. They're ready to take care of you this football season. Traveling to watch your favorite team or just streaming the game at home, find the Blue Box at Walmart, Target, Best Buy, or go to jlab.com. Love their stuff. The Blue Box. All right, John Middlekauff and I are doing a special edition Wednesday afternoon podcast. It'll range from will Chris Ballard survive with the Colts? Brock Purdy's dismal showing against the Lions in the second half. Saquon Barkley resting. That's at the end of it. Let's start with college football. So, listen, Ohio State's leading 34-0 at half, and John and I decided it's a good time to do the podcast. So, listen, a 13-member committee selected, the teams to get in. And this is what bureaucrats and, people who are political create. Is that nobody thought SMU and Boise State, they didn't look the part in the regular season. They play in weaker conferences. But the thing that really outraged me was Oregon's first game against the winner of Ohio State, Tennessee, which is a much tougher path than Penn State gets against SMU and Boise State. So the failing of the committee, and committees are created to innately fail. I mean, it's 13 different people with 13 different opinions. We know juries in this country have let the wrong people walk in my life. I just look at Oregon's season, and they were the best team on the field, and it's very hard to ask somebody to beat somebody for a second time. I picked Ohio State to win it. I didn't think it would look like this. But that, not the inclusion of Boise State or SMU, this is what bothered me.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Oregon got a raw deal, but let's face it, the way Ohio State has played the first game and the way they look in the second game, I don't think anyone would sniff them right now. They would beat everyone in the country easily. But I hear you. I mean, I think part of it is there's so much CYA of not getting sued. We had to include a non-Power 4 program. And Boise showed out decently, I thought.
Yeah.
Right. And so did ASU, who plays in the Power 5 conference, but we all look at Big 12 like, are they any good?
Right.
I think you could argue also Oregon, these teams, you're all tied in with the bowls, with this money, so many people with their hands in the cookie jar. How does Oregon not get a home game? How do these teams, Texas, I mean, it's a pretty big advantage to play in these neutral site games. What's the point of playing all season?
Yeah, I mean, Oregon did not get a home game. That to me is just, you got to be kidding me. I mean, Notre Dame lost to a directional school and got one. That's like
crazy.
Not even a good directional school. Let's talk about Ohio State. And listen, when you go to a movie, if you went to a movie that took a while to build up, but the ending was great, I always thought that was Usual Suspects. It's a good movie. You go home feeling great. If a movie starts fast and dies out, you never feel satisfied. College football now has a bigger, more dynamic ending to the season, but it does, and we knew this was coming, John. It's not that the regular season doesn't matter, but Ohio State not only lost a horrible game, they lost it late, and they looked like garbage against Michigan, and they still got in. Now, I don't have a problem with them getting in. I don't mind the regular season meaningless because I'm still going to watch the games. I watch the NFL. I know that you can start off 1-4 and make the playoffs. I still watch the games. I think the narrative that it's going to kill college football ratings this year were good. It's just what it means is if you're a good team with lots of blowouts, you can even lose a really ugly game late and you get in. And my take is, the Kansas City Chiefs lost to the Raiders late in the season last year and won the Super Bowl. You shouldn't be punished severely if you're excellent just because you lose in November and not in September. So that part of it has never bothered me, that the regular season will mean less. I'm still watching the games.
I think there's a magnifying glass. I was just thinking to listen to you talk. I don't think there's a game that actually means more, a non-playoff game in college football or the NFL, than Ohio State versus Michigan. I think it's clearly separated as the game that means the most. Saban recently went off. he can't comprehend because even in his mind, he was able to make every game the same. Even though they had Auburn as one of the biggest rivalries in college football. Tennessee's a big rivalry, but it never felt any different than when they played Ole Miss, than when they played LSU. He was Belichickian that way. Every opponent meant a lot. At Ohio State, it just doesn't. I mean, even Ryan Day said, like, this can never happen again. That was 3 days before they lost. So the emphasis that has been put on that game, and I think Harbaugh helped take it to another level, and then Ryan Day starting to lose. And I just think that game feels like 5 games in one, and then the way they lost. And in fairness, you watch Michigan 24 hours ago against Alabama. Now, I understand Alabama had some opt-outs. They look pretty good. I mean, they're coming to play. They have a defensive coordinator that makes $2.5 million that was just coaching at Baltimore a couple years ago and was viewed as one of the best defensive minds in football. So it's like that's a real defense. And I just think you look at that game, it was hard not to overreact, but it might have just been as simple as the coaching staff, specifically Ryan, the players, they got a little tight because the way they've looked now, it's like a looseness. We have been talking about their roster and the talent on their team. Like, to me, the difference of them and Texas, man for man, is loaded as well. Their quarterback, I'm sorry, I just don't trust on a play. Will Howard's playing pretty well right now. And if the Will Howard we have seen in the first playoff game and the second playoff game is going to look like this, they're just not going to lose. And they have a wide receiver, an 18-year-old kid. It looks like he weighs 230 pounds that is unstoppable. It's because it's not like John, Oregon's not trying to cover him. They just can't.
You're a former NFL scout because Travis Hunter wants to go both ways. If you told me today Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith of the Buckeyes were in this draft, I would take them 1 and 2 in any order because Travis Hunter, I do not like this high profile, want to play both sides of the ball. Eventually, you're going to have to pick a side. I think Caleb Downs is a better corner than Travis Hunter. I think he's one of the best college players I've seen in the backfield. I'm not kidding when I say this. I was told by an NFL general manager that Caleb Downs will be the number 1 pick next year. He said, I don't care who improves. He goes, outside of a star quarterback, and we may have one. If Drew Allar at Penn State flourishes, he may come out this year, next year, whatever. But Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, and they're not eligible for the draft. Those guys are not college players. They're pros playing on Saturday. Like so my takeaway is Ohio State has 2 players, one on both sides. They're just not college players. I felt this about Jamar Chase at LSU. It's like, okay, that's not a college player. It's a pro playing on Saturdays. If he was a basketball player, he'd be in the NBA.
I think the problem with Travis Hunter, and I saw Dion say this within the last month, do not draft him if you don't embrace him playing both ways, because that's the game plan. And to me, Dion not only speaks as his coach, it feels like he speaks as his parent, feels like he speaks as his agent. Like, that's his representation for Travis Hunter. And I do think that's going to be complicated because he is truly dead set on that. And based on what he's doing in college, I understand that mindset. I don't believe it can work because of the wear and tear.
Same.
Same. But like you say, those other 2 guys like just have defined roles. It's very defined because my thing with Travis Hunter is if you're my best corner, my best wide receiver, if you get injured, I lose 2 players, where those other guys, you also get rest. So I hear you. The Jeremiah Smith thing, I don't remember seeing a wide receiver this dominant this early where his body type was that physically developed. I mean, his legs look so big.
When I was a sportscaster in Las Vegas, I covered Larry Johnson, the basketball player at UNLV. And that was before weightlifting was a part of sports in general. I mean, it was out there, but it wasn't like basketball players weren't spending a lot of time in the gym. Larry Johnson was so physically dominant that at the college level, you got 26 points just on putbacks, just on second opportunities. He weighed 45 pounds more than other forwards and was stronger than all of them. So I just look, and here's the thing about Will Howard. I mean, to me, he's a big, strong kid who's mobile, so he's a draftable player. I saw him play at Kansas State. I thought, that's a big, strong kid. Now you give him star players. I don't know if he's an NFL starter, but I think right now Ohio State has the best combination of coaching and talent. Whether they have better talent than Georgia or Texas, who knows? But last year, Michigan only had like 3 5-star guys. Alabama had like 18. Georgia has 15 over the last couple of years. So talent's hard do you get the most out of your talent? But I don't think we're overreacting to say that the last 2 games, Ohio State's hitting harder. They're more explosive. They don't look these games, they're intimidating Oregon. They intimidated Tennessee. They looked like Tyson at 21 years old. Like other big men feared him in the ring. Ohio State looks, I think Oregon like surrendered about 8 minutes in. It was like it was over.
Well, the irony was when the other game ended and you came right to the game and it was 7-0, and you're like, whoa, there's a minute into the game. And then Fowler was like, yeah, it was a 2-play, 70-yard drive. You're like, oh, that's going to be a problem. But we had just seen the same thing with Texas, and then they slowed down immediately.
Right.
Ohio State, their foot never came off the pedal. I do wonder if after, because they tried to get into a heavyweight fight with Michigan instead of just slinging the rock around where Michigan wouldn't slow them down. And they lost and it bit them. And I think everyone called out their manhood and their toughness. Like, you think you're a tough program. We've seen you against this Harbaugh level operation. And I would say Michigan still has that soul in them, the way they play. And you're not as tough as them. And they go, we are a tough team. We've paid a premium for all these guys. I mean, you see the physicality and the speed in which they have. And it's almost like they got to reset and take it personally because they've come out with a violence that you just haven't seen in college football. I mean, I think
that's a perfect word is violent. They look violent defensively.
We'll see, and hopefully this Georgia Notre Dame game actually gets played. But I think there's only one other team that can truly match their violence, and that's Georgia. And we saw them do that. I think the first time they played Texas in Austin, you're like, Jesus. Yes. That's what Ohio State has come out on defense. Because we know offensively, if they just are playing a B-, B+, somewhere in the B, they don't even need an A game. They're going to be hard to beat because they can score points. If their defense is going to look like this, I mean, good luck. Because Georgia doesn't have that explosion. Obviously, Notre Dame doesn't have that explosion. Texas, you just can't trust their offense. It just goes through terrible spurts. Penn State, I think, is probably the one team would be comfortable because they've seen them. They know their personnel, wouldn't be intimidated by them. But they still got to, we got a long way to go before we get that matchup.
Let's talk about Texas 39, Arizona State 31 in double overtime. So let's just start with the targeting infraction that wasn't called. And that gave Texas, an opportunity because in my opinion, if they call targeting, which it looked like to me, then Arizona State, do you believe they go on to win the game?
Well, I think it would have changed. Yeah. I mean, it would have dramatically changed the situation.
All right. So targeting, I looked it up. It's forcible contact with an opponent that goes beyond a legal tackle. The rule is intended to reduce concussions, and you can't lead with the crown of your helmet. Well, that's 3 for 3 targeting. I almost felt like watching the game that referees didn't want to decide it. That the crown of the helmet, because if it's forcible contact with an opponent that goes beyond a legal tackle, well, a legal tackle, you can't lead with a helmet. It was helmet on helmet.
Yeah.
I felt like officials thought, you know what? It wasn't necessarily the crown of the helmet. It was more helmet on helmet. And there are helmet on helmet hits a lot in college football and pro football that aren't called. But I thought the officials, I think in the first quarter, that's more of a targeting. I think in the third quarter, it's targeting. I thought in that moment, refs were like, it's almost like NBA refs in a playoff game, game 7. They're going to give you more contact. They do not want the NBA finals decided at the free throw line.
Yeah, to me in college football, they call that every time. I
Yes.
thought there was a play earlier in the game or the second half where Arizona State picks Ewers, and the other player, last second, the other defender turns his body but still takes out the wide receiver. Massive collision. I think 95% of the time they call that. And I was going to throw up if they had called that because that would have dramatically changed the game as well.
Yeah.
And I was surprised, honestly, they didn't. But I think the moment they didn't call that, and you could say, well, he turned last second, he still took him out, his head flew back.
Yeah.
They called that. I watched college football for 3 straight months. That's called every single week.
Every time.
Which I hate. I hate targeting because I hate the rule in general. College football is way more punitive than the NFL because they kick these kids out for a game, and then they miss the half of the next game. Most of these guys aren't Ed Reed. They're not going to the NFL. So they only get to start a couple years in college. I think we have moved past this point of 5-10 years ago. The CTE, the lawsuits, it has been coached out of the game. No one is trying to injure anybody. And I think all this stuff, the game is played so quickly. We saw it a couple weeks ago when Trevor Lawrence slid, and the dude from the Houston Texans, Alshire, took him out. No one's
Yeah.
trying to hurt anybody. These things, it's so easy to judge everything from your couch. This has been coached out of the game, actively coached out of the game, from the lowest levels up through the NFL. I think we need to get rid of it, honestly.
Yeah, same.
I hate even having these debates. It should just be like, forever it wasn't called, and then they overreacted because of the
Yeah.
CTE lawsuits. And now the level of hard hits to me are so few and far between. And even when they happen, it's more just because you have two athletes running at rapid speed. And that play when Ewers was picked and that kid ran into him, like, what was he supposed to do? Float away? And even on the Texas kid, the ball's tipped. Like, he's not trying to hurt him. He's just trying to tackle him. He's trying to make a play. I just think we need to get rid of that rule in general. I freaking hate it.
Yeah, so I mean, you and I both believe it is targeting. We both hate the rule. I wouldn't have called it, but I would never call it. And I hate the punitive nature.
Totally.
In the NFL, they experiment with calls in the preseason. They'll be overly punitive on a call in the preseason and early September. Just, have you ever noticed that in the NFL? If it's a certain call and they're creating it, they'll make a point of emphasis in the preseason and early September, and then they'll scale back. In college, you don't. Before this year, you kick a great player out of a big game, you lose the game, you're done. You can't play for a natty. So you and I both agree is I thought it was targeting.
Think of the standards, too. You're holding 19 and 20-year-old guys, too. It's like these guys, no one's trying to hurt anybody in 2024. I believe that to my core. So I think we need to get rid of it personally, but I doubt that's going to happen.
Two takeaways. First, Kenny Dillingham, who was an offensive coordinator briefly at 3 schools, is a sensational coach.
Yeah.
They had 510 yards. They had 28-17 first down advantage, 97-60 play advantage, 28-17 first down edge. And I don't believe they have a 5-star athlete. One. The level of coaching, and you know what I like? They don't. I mean, Cam Skattebo is one Division I offer. Now, he's going to end up getting drafted, as you've talked about. This is the best running back draft in a long time. Jesus. I mean, good God, the Penn State has that Singleton kid. He didn't get talked about instead of Ashton Jeanty. If Singleton goes to the right team with a better offensive line, he could end up being the better running back in the NFL. So there's just running backs everywhere. But I mean, I like Sam Leavitt a lot. He's a very young quarterback. He will be a pro, 6'2.5", 210, dual threat, mobile. Again, you can see him and think, oh, that's what a pro is going to look like in 2 years. I think he's like 20 years old in 2 years. And so the quarterback's good. But to have that kind of dominance, 37 to 22-minute time of advantage, when Texas has, I bet you, at least 14 to 16 5-star guys and 40 4-star guys. To me, I thought if I was Sark coming out of that game, I'd be a little embarrassed. I thought it was a coaching mismatch.
Yeah, I thought he even kind of mentioned that. Like, we got to play a lot better. He was, in his post-game interview on the field, it looked like he was pretty shell-shocked. I mean, at one point in time, it was 4th and 13. I mean, it's basically 4th in Texas, or the game's over. And then they score that touchdown.
On the deep ball. Yeah.
Jeez Louise. One thing, the Boise State team that we saw play Penn State is not as good as Chris Peterson's Boise's teams, but they just have an all-time great player.
Yep.
This ASU team, the more and more I watched them today, reminded me a lot of those Chris Peterson teams, because it probably has more guys that you realize that probably end up going like 6th, 7th round, and they just had a grittiness and a toughness to them. The quarterback was really fantastic. I mean, he had to pull plays out of his you-know-what just to give them an opportunity.
Yeah.
And that running back, I mean, I thought, listen, the hype on him, this kind of, it's easy for everyone to latch onto this white guy running guys over. He might have had the flu or something today because he was clearly sucking some wind and throwing up. He single-handedly gives them an edge. And obviously the double pass, but he was freaking fantastic. And breaking tackles against those guys.
30 carries, 143 yards. I watched him and I thought he's the guy that played for Tampa years ago.
Mike Allstott.
Yeah, it's like there's a Mike Allstott component. I think he's got a little better speed. Maybe he doesn't. But he's a kid. I think he's out of like Sacramento or something. He had one scholarship offer. That is a pro. But I think Dillingham, he grew up Chandler, Arizona. He always wanted to be Arizona State's coach. This is his dream job. This is not a stepping stone. Like, this is the job he always wanted. And it's cool because I think Arizona State's always been one of those programs we think's a little bit of a sleeping giant. Like, why aren't they better? And I think they found their Chris Peterson. I think they found a brilliant coach. But the Texas thing, and I wrote this down. And listen, Saban loved him. Washington had a good AD that loved him. USC hired him. Texas's AD, Chris DeConte, is maybe the smartest AD in the country. Smart people hire Sark. Okay, John, like 3 schools with big football brands have hired him. NFL teams liked him. Saban loved him. We know he's a good coach. But one of the things, and we know he can scheme plays. I mean, I thought today, they had a couple of different crisis situations where they had good scheme plays. But I will say his teams feel loose. So it's easy from a couch from somebody to say he's overrated. But if Saban thinks you're a good coach, and he won assistant of the year in college under Saban, and he's had 3 different programs hire him. And again, he may end up in the national, I mean, this guy's in the right spot, right? He's in the playoff. How do you define him? My knock on him is that his teams always look loose, like they're just not buttoned up, which is interesting because he coached under Saban, who's the opposite. That's my take. And I don't know what his comp is, but I just feel like too many times on the passing game, it's a jump ball. Like, he doesn't have defined reads. Too often it's just like, let's just get better players and throw a ball up the sideline. Is that Ewers or Sark?
Yeah, to me, I've been as critical on Sark as anyone over the years. I bet an astronomical amount of money when my guy DeBoer played him last year, and I thought it should have been easier. But I'm going to defend him here. I think you can look at Ewers' box score. It doesn't look that bad. He's 20 of 30, 322.
Right.
To me, he's a liability. And I mean, for the talent that they have, because the one knock you've had on Sark, if you've just watched him coach over the years, like, kind of a soft operation, a little like Lincoln Riley. Well, he pivoted pretty well, used that checkbook. Their defense is not soft. I mean, look today. I mean, the way they got back into the game was a freak double pass where the guy's covered and he comes back, Skattebo underthrows him. The kicker missed a couple kicks. I mean, it hadn't he been nails all season long.
Yeah.
So it's a little freakish the way they came back. I mean, that game was one for the ages with the stuff. I think you look at Quinn Ewers, who, again, if you just look at the box score, doesn't look that terrible. This is a national championship roster without a national championship quarterback. Yeah. I actually think Sark has grown a lot. I think he tries to call plays around this player sometimes. I think he gets into situations where he doesn't trust them. That's the thing with Dillingham. Like, they have full trust in that court. Doesn't have a choice. I think sometimes just like, hey, we can just run some bubble screens. Our athletes are better than your athletes, right? And sometimes, for whatever reason, how this team, 53 yards rushing against ASU, like, you would think with the amount of talent they have on their offensive line and the talent they have at running back, if you would have said, what did they rush for coming into this ASU game, I would have said easily 140 yards. And it wasn't working. They just abandoned it. And ASU selling out, like, make Quinn Ewers beat us, which ironically kind of did in the overtime because you didn't cover anyone in the end zone. But for most part, the reason they got back into it, the interception. How many times this year have Texas been in a position where they can really put the nail in the coffin and Quinn Ewers turns the ball over? Or they're down in a game like against Georgia, they're coming back and he turns the ball over. There is just an element of, I mean, if he was an NFL player, he would be highly, highly criticized. And I would imagine the Texas Reddit community and the football community, he's a pretty polarizing guy. And everyone's like, we're going to Arch Manning next year. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Right.
If I was a Texas fan, I'd be like, well, why isn't he just playing right now? Because if he's as good as everyone says he's going to be and he's a Manning, I mean, the only team that I've seen that could even remotely play with us would be Ohio State. We can't beat Ohio State with this player. That's what I would be thinking. And there's a loyalty. And listen, I think this is where coaches sometimes are different than personnel people, definitely different than fans. They're very loyal to a guy. Clearly, him and Quinn have a long-standing relationship now. He's rode with them this long. They've had a lot of success, right? Last year they were in the playoffs. This year they're now in the Final Four. But, man, I think you have this great – I mean, their defense – how many of those guys look like NFL players? I mean, they have freshmen that look like they're going to be top 10 picks. And what are they going to be against Ohio State, would you guess? A 6-point underdog?
Oh yeah, I would. That's a great question. I would take Ohio State -6. To me, I wouldn't take Texas until we got into like 7.5.
Yeah.
Um, um, it's just funny these. So I thought it was a great game.
Texas's offense has been their problem. Their
Yeah,
defense, for the most part, this year has been fantastic.
yeah,
And to me, it's not Sark, it's the quarterback because the quarterback is just not that good relative to what their standard and the way they're playing. I mean, if they had some of these quarterbacks that we've seen in college football over the years, the guys Bama has had, the Joe Burrows, the Trevor Lawrences. I mean, I think we would be looking at Texas and Ohio State like equals. But when you have a
yeah.
quarterback who's just not, I mean, that pick he threw was just terrible. And even who's Jesse Palmer's like, you can't put that much air under the ball. And ASU's DBs are not, Deion Sanders and Ed Reed back there. You just make it too easy. And he does it all the time. His interceptions are really, really bad, Colin.
Yeah. Penn State 31, Boise State 14. Boise State, for the record, had the ball in the red zone. I counted 4 times. It could have been 5 and didn't get any points. So Penn State gave them multiple opportunities to make that game much closer. But Boise State had a touchdown that was called back because of a holding penalty. So it was 31-14, but it didn't look like a blowout. I mean, there was multiple opportunities.
It was
for
a good
Boise.
game.
It was a good game. So it's really interesting. So first of all, Carter is a top 5 player. He got banged up. Great player. Nick Singleton, who was like Gatorade Player of the Year in high school, he's going to be a stud pro running back. Drew Allar is fascinating. Big guy, big arm. There are stories out there that NFL scouts think he may still go pro. And many say he would go number 1 simply on arm strength and size. Can I look at Penn State, and I have great respect for the program, but they remind me a little bit of a poor man's Ohio State. They're just never quite, they don't have quite as many NFL guys. They're just not quite as good. People criticize James Franklin, but the guy won at Vandy, so he's fine. He's a great recruiter. Can Penn State win the Natty?
I think they'd need Carter to be healthy because early in that game, he had one pass rusher like, oh, that looks like Micah Parsons in number 11. And then when you go with the other guys, I told you, I think last week, I think they could win the whole thing. But I mean, you lose a top 5 player. I don't care how good your recruiting is. And it's pretty damn good. That'd be a big blow. But how good does Warren look? The running backs look fantastic. The quarterback's playing great. Do you just trust James Franklin? I think the one thing we saw with ASU and Boise, there's a grittiness and a toughness that just even Ohio State's showing it now, but they go for a long period of time without it because they don't need it.
Yeah.
Boise State for 25 years is built on that. And I think Kenny Dillingham has brought that to Arizona State. And that's why they can go toe to toe with a team where they don't have one guy that would start for the other team. I mean, that's truly, if you remove Jeanty, which I mean, Jeanty would technically start for Penn State, but they would rotate the other guys in at
Singleton's a great running back.
Yeah, so I actually learned more about Jeanty in that game than I do with some of his 250-yard games against New Mexico, running over Penn State. It was an impressive, just gritty effort by the guy, running for every yard was contested, running his ass off. He's a big-time player.
Yeah, he doesn't fumble, but he did twice in this game.
That was
and he only
freaky.
He only averaged 3.5 yards a carry. I think part of Jeanty's strength, I mean, I don't put him in the class of Zeke or Saquon, Adrian Peterson, or McCaffrey as an NFL first-round running back. I don't. He'll go first round because it's a weak draft. But
he's 5'8". I mean, that's kind of it's not ideal.
Yeah, I think his strength is that he is so small and so powerful. He is hard. Like with running backs, you don't want a 6'2" running back. I think he's hard to get that pad level low enough to get him a shot. And so what you end up doing when you tackle him, it's almost always arm tackles because he's 5'8". So when he runs and lowers his head, it's like tackling a 5'5.5" guy. He always has the center of gravity and he always has sort of leverage on you, hips down. And so it's like Penn State guys held him to 3.5 yards a carry, but he broke so many arm tackles. So it's like I look at him as a first-round running back in a weak draft. I don't look at him as an NFL superstar. I don't think he has the juice of Saquon. I don't think he has the strength or speed of Adrian Peterson. I don't think he's as talented as McCaffrey, who's also small. I think part of the package with him is you just can't get under him. And his size is, and I think in the NFL, he'll have success. But I don't know. As I watch him, my take is he'll need the right fit in the NFL to be a star, but he is a starter.
Yeah, well, to me, he's going to get drafted really high. I think he's going to be a good player in the NFL. I would struggle, if let's say somewhere between 15 and 25. I think a lot of people think that's the range he's going to get picked. Well, if I'm drafting 20th and then my next pick is 50th, why wouldn't I? If I could take a corner or an offensive lineman at 20th, I can get one of these other good running backs at 50th. So it's kind of supply demand. It's always why a lot of people, why did Jim Harbaugh take the tackle at 5 and then take Ladd McConkey in the second round? Because there's a ton of wide receivers in every draft. So I'm going to get a guy that starts in the second round. We see it every year with wide receivers. Like, would you take a wide receiver in the top 10? Well, if I'm drafting after you, I hope you do, so I can take another position. I can take a wide receiver later. So, I mean, every game I watch, Henderson for Ohio State, he's an NFL player. All these teams have NFL players at running back. So why would I take a running back in the first round if I think I get 95% or 90% of that guy maybe in the third round? What if I get Skattebo? Skattebo's going to run like a 4.75. What if I can get that guy in the third round? You don't think Jim Harbaugh's going to like Skattebo? Does that guy have Charger written all over him?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I told you this recently. Woody Marks for USC is their best back since Reggie Bush. He may be a 5th-round back. Now, maybe Jeanty's better than him. He's not that much better than him. Like, it is a loaded. I mean, this Singleton kid at Penn State was the National Gatorade Player of the Year, was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year. Singleton is, again, I mean, I don't know his measurables, but he's like 6 feet 227.
Looks small to me.
With a burst. It's like if anybody dropped in the first round, I could see Jeanty dropping, not because he's not good, but because of the depth of the position.
The one thing, I'm with you. I just think it's, if he measures in at 5'8", remember Darren Sproles, who was as dominant of a college player in the last 25 years as there was. Now, times have changed a lot with size, but he was same thing, 5'7", 5'8". He went in the 4th round. Now, that modern-day player would go much higher. It is difficult to pull the trigger on a guy in the teens or the low 20s that is 5'8", no matter how dominant he is. And again, I think that teams are going to hesitate. They're going to really like I haven't texted a scout that doesn't love the player, but that height thing is just something with GMs and coaches that is just, that's where Drew Allar, right now today, I know Drew Allar is committed to go back to school, right? Which is worth millions of dollars, I'm sure. I would say a month ago, he was not viewed as a lock first-round pick. I don't see how he would not go in the first round today. I don't know what pick. He would be a first-rounder, right?
No question. No question.
So now we start going, well, we know quarterback inflation. They go higher. People are going to nitpick these other two quarterbacks. I mean, he's bigger. He's stronger. And now he's playing really well under the brightest lights. He wins another game. He's playing with all these other guys. Abdul Carter, if he's healthy, is going in the top 5 or 6 picks. How much has Warren helped his draft stock the second half of this year? I mean, that guy's going to be – it's not a great draft. You're telling me he can't go in the top 10 or 12 picks?
Yeah, I mean, if you count Allar, Singleton, Carter, and Warren, those are 4-star players. So the idea, can they win a national championship? I don't know. I feel like they're a little bit of a poor man's Ohio State. But again, I mean, how many games in a row can Ohio State play perfect football? There is something to be said. I mean, Ohio State now looks like the world's best team. It is hard to play at this level for that long. Well, it's the most wonderful time of the year for getting in on all the basketball, football, hockey action at DraftKings Sportsbook. It's the season of giving, so we're being gifted college football and basketball, pro football, basketball, pro hockey to almost 24/7. It's an absolutely great time of the year. So a lot of games every day, so many opportunities to place your first bet. Now, if you're going to bet for the first time, just make it simple. Pick a team to win, any team. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook. They have an app. Download it in 90 seconds. Here's the gift for all new customers. Bet $5, just $5. If your bet wins, you get $150 in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. The code is Colin, C-O-L-I-N. New customers, $150 in bonus bets if you bet $5 and it wins. Happy holidays from DraftKings. The crown is yours. I want to do 3 NFL topics. Number one, Saquon Barkley, they're not going to play him in the final game. So I've said this before, John. I'm not an awards guy. Um, I'm not, I just don't care. I mean, I just do not. I don't know how many Pro Bowls and All Pros Tom Brady had. I know his Super Bowls. So I don't care. I don't think most athletes care. If my athletes care too much about Pro Bowls, unless they have bonuses, I'm worried about them. I would not play Saquon. I didn't like them feeding him the ball 31 times. The only position left in football, college or pro, that you can hit anybody, anywhere, anytime is a running back coming through the line. If you hit it, and nobody's going to throw a targeting foul if a running back squeezes through and you go helmet to helmet from the side. So to me, it's the last position in football that's a little bit of a pinata. And you have to consider that when they play. I remember years ago, Leonard Fournette and McCaffrey bowed out of bowl games. And I said, quarterback, bothered me. Star receiver, I'd wonder if he's soft. Running back in the Liberty Bowl, bow out. I got your back. So I don't have a problem at all with Saquon and the Eagles' decision. Do you?
No, well, if I'm the Eagles, my quarterback's already got concussion, and I don't even know if he's officially cleared a week and a half out. The two guys that I can't afford to get injured are my left tackle and my right tackle. Lane Johnson surely is not going to play in this game. And the left tackle, the Australian guy, Mailata, I doubt he's going to play either. So right up the bat, my star quarterback and the running element with him and Saquon is a huge, addition to our success. And my two-star offensive linemen are out, and I'm going to play my running back in a game that up until how long have we been playing this last game? For an extra 3 years? Didn't even exist. So we already won. We stole him from the Giants for not much money, and no one will ever forget when we probably got everyone in the Giants fired and he ran for 2,000 yards. Football's not really a record sport. What's the most record for yards? No one could tell me the exact yardage. No one cares. But if you run for 2,000 yards, that's a historic moment. They already got the record, even if it doesn't actually count. It happened. Stole him from the Giants. He ran from two. It was one of the great wins of all time. Howie, the Eagles, Sirianni, Saquon. This was a home run. Can you imagine if you were going for this record, which is not apples to apples because they did not play the same amount of games? We can argue should we care or not. It is kind of a big deal. If you didn't, it was the Jeanty Barry Sanders thing. It was like, well, he played way more games than Barry Sanders. But if Saquon Barkley broke his ankle in a game that literally means nothing, even if other guys were playing, how would the only thing that matters, the only thing that mattered from the start of the season for the Eagles was January. We all knew that they were going to get there, and then they got way hotter than we thought, and it's like, God, they were incredible. But if he got injured in this moment, or let's say Lane Johnson got injured in the game trying to get him the record, there's too much on the line. This team has been building this thing for 3 or 4 years to get this good. They won, Colin. The Giants lost, they won.
Baseball is the record sport. Basketball is the aesthetic sport. There's a beauty and an art to it. Football's about winning. Always has been, always will be. It's about winning. And you protect your best players as they keep lengthening the season. Now there's 17 games. Within 2 years, my guess is we have 18 games. The one position I'm going to try and protect, is running back. And it's interesting. A couple years ago, people were saying running backs have no future. The winner in an 18-game schedule, John, is running backs. I think every team will carry another running back.
Yeah.
You won't carry another Mike linebacker. I think every team now will say probably need another running back on the roster. And I do think with 18 games, roster expansion will happen. And I'm going to want an extra, let's be honest, I'm going to want an extra running back, probably an extra offensive lineman, and maybe an extra linebacker because of the hits they incur. But running backs are doing quite fine. The league is obviously pivoted to more of a running league with many of the best teams. So I know everybody was freaking out about that, but running backs are back.
Did you see a story floating around there on the internet? I don't know how much validity there is to this, but I know that, listen, it's pro sports, a lot of money in the line. I've heard crazier is that the Jets would entertain going all in and making Howie Roseman basically the czar of football. And I don't know if this is even possible, offering him equity and obviously making him paid. Because even if GMs make a lot, they make $6-7 million. Well, you have some of these coaches make it double, triple that. And Howie's got a lot of juice. But listen, you pay me $20 million a year, GMs don't usually get leverage like coaches that often to really put the hammer down and get paid. So listen, this could be a little bit of a leverage play by Howie, who's, him and Tannenbaum are closer. Just if I was the Jets, I'd take a Hail Mary on a guy like Howie to, he's from Brooklyn. That's where he grew up. I was like, yeah, I think if you're Woody Johnson, that you could do way worse than that.
Yeah, I mean, over the course of my life, I'm 60 years old now. Over the course of my life, one thing has been universally true. There's very little great. And when you get great, you never let it go. You build around great. And Howie Roseman feels like he's in a class by himself. And that includes other GMs I like. He's the most aggressive.
His job for sure.
I just think there aren't many people like that. So, I mean, great endures, great separates. And I don't care if you're, a firm in New York on Wall Street. If you have a great stockbroker, you can get me 3 good ones. They don't equal 1 great one. So to me, Howie Roseman, if he broke the bank, would deserve it. Okay, let's go 2 more topics. Brock Purdy. So you're obviously an NFL scout, and whenever, I tend to let you lead on that stuff because it's what you do and know much more about it. I've never been a huge Purdy fan. I have kind of a base belief that if the great quarterbacks are not if quarterbacks. Joe Burrow's great. Bad O-line, shitty defense, coach can't figure the clock out. He wins, and he produces. You're not always going to win if you don't have good people around you, but you'll be wildly productive. Burrow's a great example of that. Even Herbert finally has a good coach, but he was breaking rookie records as a rookie with a bad coach and the 32nd ranked offensive line. Purdy, to me, has always been an if quarterback. If the protection's good, if he's got a lead. He's now, I think we have to acknowledge, he is not a good fourth quarter quarterback. He's not a good quarterback trailing. Now, that's not 6 games or 8. It's a pretty big sample now. And I do think the separator in this league, beyond some traits, size, movement, hand size, arm, but beyond some of that is how do you play from behind? Some guys have it, some don't. I could not pay Purdy early. I could not pay him a number at 5. But he's going to have leverage because Trey Lance didn't work. If the Vikings franchise Darnold, what do? Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins? As somebody who has done this for a living, as somebody who was a fan of Purdy and has peeled back a little bit, if you ran the Niners, what do you do? Do you draft Riley Leonard in the 3rd round and what do you do?
Yeah, to me, I just play it out another year. I think as concerning as the 2 interceptions were, and they were bad interceptions in a game that an interception lost the game. 1 interception was going to lose the game. Jared Goff couldn't afford to do it. Purdy couldn't afford to do it, and he threw 2, and even Kyle admitted after the game, we lost the game with the 2 turnovers. That was the type of game we were in. His elbow nerve issue, I don't think that he has a nerve issue with his hand just randomly with the UCL thing a couple years ago. Now, luckily, he didn't tear his UCL, but he's already had Tommy John, and then he has, I would say, a relatively, I don't want to say innocuous, might be a little light, but he was not throttled. He tackled him as he was rolling. It wasn't just, he didn't just get mollywop sitting there in the pocket, and he couldn't grip it, and he said his arm was on fire.
Right.
So you're telling me your arm's on fire, you can't grip it when you've already had an elbow issue? That would gravely concern me, Colin. So the play had already really disturbed me. The second half performance this year had not been good, specifically these last 3 games. They were 6-7 in that Rams game. They win it, boom, they're playing Miami, they're playing this game, they have a chance to make the playoffs. And he throws 5 interceptions, or 4 interceptions, 2 picks that lose the Miami game and the Rams game, and then the 2 interceptions in this last game. So the game's kind of unraveled on his watch. The other thing is, over the middle of the field sometimes, when the pocket's a little muddied, I don't think he can see that well, and sometimes I think balls balloon on him.
Yeah.
And he gets lucky sometimes. Kittle's tall and can make some miraculous catches.
Yep.
But some of his picks happen when Debo, little shorter guy, not able to, overcorrect in the air, and balls fly. And his picks feel like, he did throw the one to Juwan outside. A lot of them in the middle of the field. It goes back to last year. And I do think that's an eye issue. Can't see. If you can't see, you let it go, and you're like, oh, shit. But he doesn't know that when there are guys in front of him. And this notion, everyone's like, well, he's having a great game. Well, the Lions defense was a practice squad unit beside 2 or 3 players.
That's right.
And he was eviscerating him, which is he's a good player. I hope so. Everyone's been eviscerating them. But then the picks happen in the fourth quarter. It's just like that just can't. I've told you before, he's got to hang his hat on decision making because his skill
Well,
set is not going to be outrageously special.
here, I'm going to throw this at you. And this is one of my favorite topics in all sports is cultural changes. So you and I both admit that guys like Drew Bledsoe or a more recent advance example, Carson Palmer, they didn't have 7-on-7 camps. They didn't have 10,000 throws by the time they were 12 years old. These kids are better now and faster at quarterback. There's a cultural shift happening with quarterbacks. If you go back to the 2018 draft class, now that's the one I think with Darnold, Baker, Lamar,
Lamar,
Josh. Okay, so
and Rosen.
four guys who are studs. So, and that's not the only draft class that's happened in. We also had the Herbert, Tua, Burrow draft class. I think Jalen Hurts was second round in that draft class. I may be wrong, but I think he was. We now have, you and I growing up, they always talked about that one great draft class. Oh, Marino and Elway. Since 2018 now, we have multiple quarterback draft classes where four guys hit. Four. Okay, like it's now a regular occurrence. This is a weak draft class. Last year's, we may have the best draft class ever last year. Jaden's unbelievable. Bonix is good. Penix looks good in brief duty. Caleb's a sensational talent. Drake May will be good when he gets players. And J.J. McCarthy looked unbelievable in the preseason. We may have a 5 for 5. So you go back to the Darnold, Baker, Lamar, Josh class. You go to the Herbert, Tua, Jalen Hurts, Burrow class. You go to this last class. This is a weak class. But now we have 3 draft classes. You're getting 4 high-end starters or more. And my take is next year, if you really do your homework, I think Riley Leonard's going to be the late mid-round guy that pops this year. Maybe I'm wrong, but somebody I think will pop 3rd, 4th round. I think it's Notre Dame's quarterback. Next year is supposed to be a much better quarterback, especially if Drew Allar comes out next year. What about this? You just roll the dice and say, we're not signing Darnold to a huge deal. Aaron doesn't interest us. Cousins isn't playing well. We're not signing Purdy. And you just roll the dice and say, we think it's going to be another 4 quarterback draft class. I know that you don't like to do that, but Pete, as scouts, you're 2 years ahead of where I'm at. I think culturally, we're just getting these 4 quarterback classes on a regular basis. Why not roll the dice?
Yeah, I mean, my thing specifically with Purdy is the NFL I grew up on, it was like, okay, we're not paying you right now, play it out. And that kind of has dropped by the wayside these last 4 or 5 years. The teams kind of get pushed around by the agents. Why can't you go, we got 1 more year of a contract, we're going to play it out. You're making millions off the field. You benefit from being the starting quarterback of the 49ers. If you're a great player and you're a $50 million player, I just saw their schedule came out. They're playing a last play schedule. The 49ers should dominate. The other thing was what made Kyle Shanahan so special. One with Jimmy Garoppolo, one with Brock Purdy. Should he be able to find some other guy to win with? Right? I mean, it's like if you're not going to get a Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, you should just be able to win with any kind of quarterback at a pretty decent clip. Your team's pretty good. So I'm with you. I would personally just roll it out another year, but it feels like these teams, when you talk to some of these contract negotiators now, they say it has turned into a little bit more, the players, because the money's so big now that they're so hesitant to like, fuck you, I'm not going to show up. Which
Right.
we've always seen some holdouts. They are a lot more prevalent now because even a random player is getting $60, $70 million guaranteed. And, these quarterbacks at minimum are getting $150 million guaranteed. But I would play hardball, especially if he's injured. It's the conversation's made already. It's like, yeah, we can't sign an injured player, or there's question marks about the injury. So I've said forever the 49ers drive a hard bargain. I'd be stunned if this thing is easy, and I think everything's on the table right now. I think Kyle, I think they were so desperate for the Trey Lance thing, and it blew up in their face. And I think that's kind of a one-off, that 2020 draft with the COVID.
Yeah.
We're not going to see anything like that again. And I think he feels comfortable with this, but I think he's not a idiot. Like you saw his face when Purdy threw one of those picks and he puts the thing over because he knows Monday Night Football. He doesn't want to go viral of him just going nuts. Who knows what he was saying? But he did that specifically to cover his mouth because he was like, we can't. How can you throw that ball?
Yeah.
He was hanging his hat on it up here. Like he was going to be like a Drew Brees with a little more mobility. Drew Brees' separating factor was decision making, right? Some of these other guys can get away with some dumb throws because they also make 10 incredible throws. Purdy has to not turn the ball over. And 4 turnovers in the last 3 games with their season on the line in winnable games. It'd be one thing if you're down 20 or up 20. Like these are high game. You're playing the best. And the one thing I do respect, and why I think the NFL is just crushing, Lions had nothing to play for. Whether they won or lost that game, Minnesota game meant the same thing. The 49ers are dead and gone. Season's over. And you had all these star players playing that game like it's means everything to them. And it was just like I just enjoy the level of spirit and energy that the star players in this league give us on a weekly basis. I mean, the Lions have one of the biggest games in the franchise's history coming up in 6 games. They have to fly 5 hours home in the middle of the night. They're at a huge disadvantage. And their guys laid it on the line like that was a playoff game. I mean, anyone wonders why the NFL is king, you turn on Monday Night Football, everyone knows game means nothing. Definitely for the 49ers. And it's just like these teams are throwing the kitchen sink at each other.
Finally, Chris Ballard, probably in some trouble as the GM of the Colts. So, it's interesting because I think he hired the right coach in Shane Steichen. I don't think they had a choice on quarterback. Listen, when Jim Irsay impulsively told them to get rid of Carson Wentz after he had 27 touchdowns and 7 picks because he had a bad game against the Jags down in Florida, which the Colts have played poorly there for years, it put Chris Ballard and the entire organization behind the 8 ball. I think the Colts are one of those teams that we think are well run because Ballard does a really good job, but they're not because basically Irsay is one of the more impulsive owners. He's likable, but his personal life is well documented. And when I look at that franchise, I think that Carson Wentz, they had to go and get Phillip Rivers, and they've been basically bailing water. They've had the worst quarterback luck. Andrew Luck retires right before a season. You're effed. Carson Wentz, owner tells you, get rid of him. But he's a big, strong, mobile guy who had a good season. Get rid of him. Phillip Rivers was the least athletic quarterback in the league, but again, they won with him. And Anthony Richardson, he was available. They didn't want to give away the farm for a quarterback. We had questions coming in, and he can't complete a high enough level of passes. And it's one thing to be talented and get off to a slow start. Caleb Williams, we know he's talented. We know he struggled. Anthony Richardson, he was a total question mark, not a great college quarterback, and now he's struggling here. I think you have to cut ties with him. I don't think it's a Chris Ballard issue. I think if this team had C.J. Stroud, even it made the 8th best quarterback in the league, I think they're a playoff team. But I think it wears on a team when you have to constantly overcome a quarterback. And I think in that Giants game, you saw it. You constantly, literally, as a coaching staff. I mean, you talked about this with Sark and Quinn Ewers. I watched the Colts, and they coach around Anthony Richardson. And I think that when you do that, you can win games, but you will eventually have stinkers. You're just constantly coaching around the most important position. I have a relationship with Ballard. I like him. I like the roster. Do you think he survives?
I mean, I think everything's on the table after this week when McAfee puts out the tweet and then their coach admits to, yeah, guys are showing up late. But hey, guys show up late. It's like, no, they actually don't. You think guys are showing up late to Andy Reid's meetings or Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay's meetings? And if they do, there aren't heavy repercussions. So they clearly have kind of a loosey-goosey ship. And to me, that's on the coach when it comes to meetings and stuff. And you just wonder this transition from being a coordinator, which he was a hot shot coordinator, and being the lead guy, everything's on the table. When the quarterback taps out of the game and that becomes the biggest controversy in the NFL, you have to answer for that 3 times a week instead of the coordinator just once. Like, that's your problem. How do you handle it? Do you bench him? It's all your decision. When a guy gets in trouble, when a guy says something stupid on a podcast, it's on the defensive side of the ball. And I do just wonder if Shane Steichen's a little bit over his head as a head coach. Because when a story comes out that that, hey, you guys are showing up late, and you're like, God, you guys are showing up, you better shoot that down. And then, yeah, we've had guys show up late, but hey, people show up late all over the place. No, I don't think so. Like,
Well,
because I think that snowballs into other things. Then are you not practicing well, or guys screwing around? And I think this all gets back to the Anthony Richardson tap out thing. People questioning, like, he gets injured a lot, but are they serious injuries? There's all, and no one really knows what's going on, and they feel like they've taken on, back to what you say, Jim Irsay's personality, just
well,
unreliable, and who knows what the hell's going to happen.
listen, Norv Turner. Everybody loves Norv Turner. Jimmy Johnson swears by him. Troy Aikman swears by him. Could never do it as a head coach. And he was a brilliant, brilliant coordinator. There are guys, you see it in politics. Some guys are vice presidents. Some guys are presidents. You see it all the time. A guy will be a great sales manager at a company, but you wouldn't want him running the company. He's a little loose, a little late night, but he's a great sales guy. And it's quite possible that Shane Steichen is one of these sort of modern coaches that is softer on players. He's pro players. I mean, Brandon Staley was a very good defensive coordinator. I mean, the Rams defense was excellent. He was a disaster, and it just got worse and worse and worse, and the details, and it got looser and looser. And I think, it's quite possible that Steichen, like I've said this about Ben Johnson. I think Ben Johnson is a great coordinator. Now, it is easier when you have like 8 Pro Bowl players on your offense. Sure. And I don't, when I see him talk and when I listen to him, I've said this about Mike McDaniel, I don't see a culture changer and a leader of men. What I see is a really smart guy. And by the way, Mike McDaniels is a very modern, progressive, pro player coach. What's our knock on Miami? They're soft. Shane Steichen, modern, progressive guy. What's our knock on him? Pro player. He's soft. So I think that there is this hard-ass component to football coaches, this Harbaugh, Vrabel, this sort of intense Tomlin, Belichick, that still stands true. Like, I said this the other day. Very rarely do these culture changer coaches flail. They don't all have great seasons. But very rarely do you hire a culture changer and it's a disaster. These coordinators, John, these brilliant offensive coordinators, about 1 out of 2 flame out fast. Yeah. They just don't work. So I think there's a possibility that Steichen maybe is a little bit Mike McDaniel, who the media loves because he was kind of dorky and a little nerdy and very smart, looked like a sports writer, like they kind of related to him. But in the end, is Miami, to me, is maybe the least trustable team in the league if it's under 40 degrees.
Well, and think last year, they had Vic Fangio, who's one of the best defensive coordinators of my life, and it didn't work. The players were bitching and moaning. He wants out. It's like, Mike, you get this guy working for you. You never let him leave. You fire the players before you fire this guy. He
worked everywhere.
We'll take him immediately. And to me, I heard your Pete Carroll rant. I think Pete Carroll has no shot because of his age. Fair or not, I just don't think anyone's going to hire him. I mean, I think that was a big part of Belichick, too. You look at these guys, 72, 73 years old, and you just go, well, in 5 years, he'll be 78. I think it's really working against him, even though Pete is the youngest 73-year-old in the history of human beings. But if Pete Carroll took over the Bears next year, I think they are guaranteed to make the playoffs in one of the next 3 years. Yeah. If Ben Johnson takes over the Bears, I think there's a 50-50 chance it's an all-time flameout. Yeah, because you just don't overcome it. And like you said, you watch his personality, you watch the way he carries himself. The toughness of the team is built through Dan Campbell and the drafting, and he's done a good job with schemes and the place. He's a brilliant play caller. We have seen Pat Shurmur. Remember him on the Minnesota Vikings the year with Case Keenum? It's like, this guy's a brilliant play caller. And then he becomes a head coach for the second time. It's the same thing, a disaster. Not everyone is meant for that role, and most guys are not. Just like in life, like, the older you get, I try to look at myself like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? What are my strengths and weaknesses? And the best part about the NFL, if you're a number 2 your whole life, it pays you $5 million a year to be the offensive coordinator. And listen, someone's going to pay him $10, $15 million. I get it. And it sure feels like it. But 2 years ago, rumors that I had heard was he was scared. He thought he was overwhelmed, so he didn't even really entertain it. Last year was pretty embarrassing. I mean, the Washington football team, clearly not your old Dan Snyder operation, pretty high-level group, was flying in a private jet to come talk to him, and he called them on the flight to say, hey, I'm out. pretty low-level thing. Like, that feels like something that no one, like Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel aren't doing that, even if they're going to go in a different direction the way he handled it. And I just think you hire these coordinators, everyone thinks you're getting the next Kyle or McVay. McVay's a good example. Like, he's really built more like Tomlin, and Kyle really is built like more like the whiz kid. But Kyle is kind of like this old school hard ass, like keeps everyone on their toes. I mean, he's mic'd and he's got video cameras in every room. Like, everyone's kind of on edge in that building because look at him. He's high stress. He's an intense. He's kind of a dick, which is a compliment sometimes for football coaches. And he's built up the equity now. People know he knows what he's doing, so he can ride guys in the building. I think it's hard for a young coordinator who's never had any success outside of being a coordinator if things don't go right early. And the other thing is the elephant in the room with the Bears is like this Caleb Williams situation is like there's so much pressure on making him good. Let's just say there's a chance. I mean, history would say that 5 out of the 5 guys in the draft are not going to become like 10-year starters, right? Some of them are going to miss. Well, you wouldn't bet against Jaden at this point. And with Sean Payton, as long as he's the head coach, you're not going to bet against Bo Nix. Maybe I'm one of the only high guys on Michael Penix. Like, the way Michael Penix plays translates to the NFL. Caleb, the holding on to the ball, some coaches will tell you, your boy Sean Payton will tell you too, that's something that you can't always coach out. And it is, for all the things that we want, the offensive line is not Caleb's fault. But the holding on to the ball for that was something Russell always battled. But Russell was, I don't know, their defense was a lot better. He had Pete Carroll. Their infrastructure was better, so they could kind of coach around it. But they always butted heads over that. It's like, Russell, let it go. But he became a star playing that way. Not many guys can play like that and consistently. Deshaun Watson, for a brief moment, played like that, and then it unraveled. Because most coaches go, play within the offense, and they just don't want to. And Caleb, I think, struggles with that a little bit. It's why I push back sometimes this year on the Caleb, like, well, some of these throws. Well, yeah, he's down 30-7, so he's just made a couple throws. Who cares? That's. I wonder if that job, as much as the administration, the Kevin Warren thing, if the Caleb, he's like this ball of clay, but is he really a ball of clay, or some of those, the way that he plays, going to be always the way he plays? And that holding on to the ball, accuracy, I think, is something we've seen. Like, you can improve a little bit, especially in this modern day NFL.
Yeah.
Guys are a little more open. There's no John Lynch's and Atwater's killing people, so you can be a little more inaccurate and still complete balls. I do think the feel in the pocket of holding that ball, some guys just do it for whatever, and some guys just have the knack to get rid of it. I mean, that's one reason Kyle loves Purdy. Now it's going to the other team sometimes, but he will get rid of the football. You watch Caleb, you're like, throw the ball. And Russell used to take a lot of sacks. Remember, the offensive line used to get crushed, and you'd hear people in the NFL, it's like, the offensive line, half those sacks are on him. Schlereth would always tell you. It's like it wasn't always on the offensive line, but they always got shit on for it.
Yeah, Peyton, that's one of the reasons, the primary reasons. It was a personality clash and Russell Wilson's inability to let go of the ball in Denver. Okay, obviously, Notre Dame, Georgia's been pushed back a day because of that unspeakable tragedy in New Orleans between a madman, because of a madman driving a car full speed. I just saw the video. I watched it once, and that was enough. Somebody driving full speed into a crowd. 15 dead at this time. Again, just incredibly unspeakable. College football fans down in, what has always been sort of an outdoor city in the winter. You go outdoors, you're in the streets, Bourbon Street. So just a grotesque tragedy. And so that game has been moved. I like Notre Dame, but I'm not sure how strongly I feel about that. After watching Ohio State dismantle Oregon and Tennessee, I think the only strong opinion I have is Ohio State is the best balance of talent and coaching right now. And I also think I am happy for Ohio State because I think everybody thought Ryan Day was a good coach, but good coaches have bad Saturdays and Sundays. I mean, they do. It's okay. Like I've had bad shows. You as a scout, you probably missed on a player. Politicians have bad speeches. Ryan Day had a bad day coaching against Michigan, and he has had 2 great days coaching against Tennessee and an Oregon, and I'm happy for him. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, if he wins the national championship, people will forget about the 4 losses to Michigan pretty quickly. Let's hope this game. I mean, obviously, like you said, you wake up to that news, you have to wonder if the administrations from Notre Dame and Georgia are a little uneasy. Some of the bombs and stuff about even how can anyone guarantee the safety of everybody. I was honestly like, would they move this game? It becomes so difficult logistically. Just hope it gets played and everyone could stay safe because I know if I was going to the game, I'd be hesitant at this point in time. And I've only been to Bourbon Street one time when I was in
Yeah.
college. It is not very wide. This isn't the Vegas Strip where there's just a lot of room. This is a pretty tight corridor where
Yep.
you would be a sitting duck. And
Yeah.
I'm with you. I watched that video. And it's one of those you just turn off your phone. And you just can't even fathom what you witnessed.
Yeah. And there's going to be obviously your news organizations are going to have more, so I'm not going to speculate. I saw a picture of the guy. He was an Army vet, born in Texas. That's what we know. But
Well, and think
rough.
about you got New Year's Eve with this game the next night. The amount of alumni from places like Notre Dame and Georgia, the amount of people that would be there naturally, it's got to be one of the most popular nights on Bourbon Street. It's just beyond awful.
It is. John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, a special Wednesday podcast over an hour. What a pleasure. What a treat. Congrats to Texas, Ohio State, and Penn State. And let's get ready for Notre Dame and Georgia tomorrow. Good talking to you, bud.
See you, Colin.